Hi, Vicki. It's so good to see you. It's been a while, but every time we get on the call, there's something that I learn about design from you. I wanted to tell you, and I'm sure I've told you before, we've been wanting to offer training in design. You have a special way of looking at things that I think would be of value to our members. So we're glad to have you as an incoming speaker. So can you give us a little bit of information about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. And it's really a pleasure to help educate your members about the role of design and other designers out there that are part of your membership and constituency. I'm a packaging designer and I'm also a design strategist. So when I'm designing packaging and really anything that I'm designing, I'm going towards whatever my client's business goals are. So whether that's increasing loyalty or increasing their sales or increasing their bottom line, whatever I'm designing is really with that goal in mind. And I do that because I'm a graphic designer by trade. So I do it with design, I do it with art direction. Sometimes I'm consulting as a creative director, either to the brand or to the converter whose client is the brand, but we're always trying to move it forward. And I use design techniques to really move that, to have that kind of material impact. And I'm designing typically labels, I'm designing packaging, I have an expertise in digital manufacturing processes, whether that's using HP Indigos or Zycons or Candies, or sometimes it's digital finishing like Scodix or Hycon or some of those kinds of things. So I am expert in leveraging that digital printing technology in the mix of everything that brand is producing, because there's always a high volume and there's a lot of different campaigns. And so that's kind of a lot that I do, but that's what I do. That's how I work.
That's interesting that you say that. As you were talking, I started thinking about our members, and it used to be, and I think in some ways it still is, a company comes in and they just want boxes printed, and they don't necessarily have a design strategist, and they're relying on the box company, the designer in the box company or the salesperson in the company to decide what that's going to do. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I guess my question is, how does a designer put themselves into that kind of a role with a customer?
So I started putting myself in that role early, 25 years ago, at the beginning of my career. And just a simple example would be someone would come to me and they would say, hey, I want a folder with inserts. And then I would say, well, what are you trying to achieve? Because I'm not sure the folder with the inserts is going to get you to where you want to go. And so I started just asking those questions intuitively way before I thought of design strategist. That was just, I always just wanted to help them get to their end goal. And then I have this, what I call this left brain right thing happening. So I have an Ivy League education that was not in design. And then I went to design school. And so the mix of that is what really helps me be able to get deep into the strategy and really get into all of these different techniques and strategies to help the customers, which is really why I started doing the master classes, because I know we're going to talk about that, but I do these master classes, and it's really to help other designers or other manufacturers or converters start to think this way. Because when we think this way and we think in business terms, it really expands our skill set and changes the trajectory of the types of conversations we have to being just tactical, to be much more strategic. So they'll bring us in much earlier in their process.
Very good point. And I can see it so clearly from as far back as when I started working here. I just understood the importance of that designer being a part of that process. So thank you for sharing that. I can't wait to know more. I had a couple questions for you, so I'm gonna ask you a question, and please offer your thoughts about this. When you're planning packaging for a retail store or an e-commerce package, what is the same, or what in your mind changes as it relates to the design?
It's different when you're designing specifically for retail or specifically for e-commerce. And I'll give you a perfect example. I designed for a specialty food company. They bring everything in from Turkey, and they showed me their bottle and they said, this isn't selling off of the shelf. And if you're familiar with the minimalist design movement, it was very minimalist. And that looked different for a minute on the retail shelf, but then everything starts to look minimalist and the packaging needs to have shelf appeal. So when I saw it and I did a little bit of research on how that was produced and who produced it and how that was designed and their process and so on, I came back to them and I said, you know, this looks like it was designed for e-commerce and yet you're selling it on a retail shelf. And he said to me, well, originally we were going to sell these direct to consumer, but then we switched and decided to put them on the retail shelf. And then I had the same response you just had and went, oh, because it's very different. The shelf appeal is essential because we have such a small amount of time. And I know I'm doing a webinar for you. And so if we reference that, if you want to learn more about that, you can watch that webinar. It's called It's About Time. And I don't know when you'll post that, but it'll be sometime this fall. We have a really short attention span and we have a short amount of time on the shelf. So when I'm designing for a retail space, it's really with that short amount of time in mind, because what I want to do is if someone knows what they're looking for, I want to capture their attention enough just so they'll look at mine. Okay, so you think, pick me, pick me. And it could be with a tactile effect. It could be with the colors. It could be with some kind of shiny bling, metallic something. But what I'm trying to do is divert attention in 2.5, 3, 5, 8 seconds, whatever it is. Now, if I'm designing packaging and I know it's going direct to consumer, then what I need to do is pay less attention to that shelf appeal, because that package isn't against all of the competitors on the same shelf. It's against the competitors on social media, which is a little different. And if it's against the competitors on social media or on Google, when I Google and all those images come up, then I'm looking at it there instead, and it's a different type of customer. But there's a second layer to that. And that second layer to that on that packaging for a direct to consumer is that as a shopper, I may experience that brand for the very first time in my home in terms of a physical touch point, which is why I always say a brand's packaging is their most important touch point, bar none. It's more important than any other touch point they make, because when I get that package, it says so much about the quality of the product inside, whether it's food or lotion or wine or something else. That packaging says a lot and starts to trigger a lot on people's subconscious about the quality and the expectations, whether they might keep it or return it. All that's happening in fractions of seconds as they start to hold and touch it.
This is kind of own personal question. So if it's, but you know, I've always paid attention to color trends. That's something that I've been attracted to. And I remember one day a couple of years ago, I walked into my favorite clothing store and everything was orange, like everything, every shirt, and orange is not my color. And I thought, you know, everyone's following this color trend. So my question to you as it relates to packaging is, do color trends affect packaging, and when should you follow the trend and when should you go outside the box?
Yes, I think everything follows color trends, but there's a trickle down effect. So it starts in fashion, which is typically where we see it. It starts in fashion, and it may take a few years for it to end up in packaging. Where we've seen it accelerate is back to these new direct-to-consumer brands. They'll pick up on something very quickly on Instagram. And because they're not a Kraft or a Heinz or a Coke, they can jump into it because their volume is so much lower. They're a lot more nimble and they can jump into those kinds of trends. Now, keep in mind, there's trends and there's fads. And so if they jump on it and it's a fad, and let's say orange is big in 2020 and periwinkle, I think, is the color of the year that Pantone declared this year, then it can start to look dated within a couple of years, similar to typefaces or similar to minimalist design. So there's a difference between following a trend, whether it's cool colors or warm colors, But I think more important than that, when we start talking about colors, I think it's a lot more important for a brand to match the colors and the feelings that they're trying to portray for their brand with that color palette and with that typography and with that branding. That's essential. I mean, that's what we do as designers, is we really want that to match the personality and the story of the brand.
Okay.
Mhm.
Good
Yeah.
answer. I understood exactly what you're saying. I'm gonna pay attention. So this question, customers seem to want more and more. Both the retail customer does, as well as the person that's ordering, the company that's ordering the packaging. They have lots of new requests because of what their customers are saying. And how does a company make sure that they are giving the customer what they want and need, at the same time making sure it's a good decision for what they are trying to accomplish?
So I think you're talking about balance. And
Yes.
so we can talk about that. Let's say it's sustainability, right? So there's a lot of companies that say, I want to be much more sustainable. But then when you start to talk to them about what it's going to require to make those sustainability changes, some companies will back off, because to be more sustainable costs more. And if it costs more, then that comes out of their profits, that comes out of their earnings, or it comes out of their margins, and they're not willing to do that, or they've got to pass that on to the customer, and then the customer pays more for something that's more sustainable, which isn't really just, right? So when you start thinking about that and your customers and who your customer base is, would they pay more? Would they not? And why is it the customer that has to pay that? So there's a whole problem in that, in terms of the supply chain and who's responsible for those costs. But to answer your question, it's really a balance in making decisions so that everyone feels somewhat satisfied. So Patagonia is going to make a very different decision, or Allbirds is going to make a very different decision than another brand who's wading into sustainability but can't necessarily afford it, or doesn't have the customer base that will pay for it. So I think that's one way. I think another way is right now, and I think this is just a across the board trend that will continue, is this idea of personalization. And so sometimes you get into brands that want to personalize, and yet they don't know how to do that. And do they do that with all of their products? Do they do that with some of their products? And they don't really know how to navigate that. That's something that I specialize in knowing how to navigate that. The thing is, with customization or limited editions, however a brand is going to do it, it's a limited edition if it's limited, which means it can't be like that all of the time. There always needs to be a contrast. And I don't think that mass production is going away. I do think that personalizing our offerings, whether it's to someone very specific on a direct-to-consumer product, or maybe it's limited editions for something seasonal or something related to sports, or some kind of new product offering that healthcare or beauty brand is offering. I think that's here to stay, because if you look just at, say, the makeup industry, we can now go on our phones and do AR virtual try-on. Well, if I do a virtual try-on, then that's very personalized to me. And then I log in on the site, and then it's attached to me. But then if I can create a formula, can I then get that formula that's very specific to me? And then in the logistics of that, could that brand also customize the packaging so that it's even more bespoke to me? And if you think about that from a brand perspective, all of that bespoke, very customized offering is really valuable. I mean, I'll pay more for that because I think it's just for me. Again, we're going back to perceptions, but people will pay more for that for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. I bought 4 new pairs of shoes because anyway, okay, this is my last question. If you have anything else to add, we can go from there. But what are you seeing that is unique in the packaging world today, and how do you find those kinds of cool things?
Oh, I see things all the time that are unique. Just yesterday, I found a company that's doing some kind of compostable paperboard packaging for dry goods, which I think is really interesting because one of the barriers, pun, is that when we have things that are fiber-based, we know that those are recycled a lot more than things that are not fiber-based, but we need that plastic barrier if it's something liquid or sticky or something like that. With dry goods, it's different because it's the porosity, right? It's not going through. So it has to be, you know, if it's food, it has to be food safe, or if it's cosmetics, there's a lot of regulations here and also in the EU that has to pass. I curate a lot of different things on a lot of different sites to find things that are new and interesting, but I'm always looking for ideas of different substrates, different tactility that's also recyclable, different tactility that uses other kinds of non-petrol based materials to manufacture. So those are the different things I look at. And then I'm also always looking at what the design trends are, you know, for different things. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it was so nice to interview you. Vicki will be doing some webinars, but we're also doing a one-day program on design, and that will be posted on our education calendar.